Jimmy Kimmel returns as President Trump orders his attorney general to speed up prosecutions of political rivals because delay is, quote, killing our reputation. Democrat Colin Allred is trying again to win a U.S. Senate seat in Texas, but first, he must win the Democratic nomination. We ask him about two steep climbs ahead. Fired up about free speech. I know that's a pun. We explore pressures from the left and the right with Greg Lukianoff, head of the Foundation for Individual Rights and Expression, or, you guessed it, FIRE. Hello, everyone. I'm Major Garrett in Washington. Welcome to the Takeout. It is great to be back because truly I miss you every time I'm away. I've been at this a while, so let me tell you something. Most politicians squirm when you read their quotes back to them. Few, in my experience, squirm more than President Trump. He really dislikes being reminded of what he said. Too bad. I hate my opponents. The president said that at the memorial service Sunday for Charlie Kirk, the conservative activist and grassroots mobilizer who, as the president noted, did not hate his opponents, but wished, if he could, to persuade them. Trump looked that spirit in the eye on stage yesterday and said, no, my method is not persuasion or wishing better for my opponents. My method is to hate them. Direct quote. Here's another. We can't delay any longer. It's killing our reputation and credibility. Justice must be served now. This was part of a social media post ordering Attorney General Pam Bondi to expedite prosecutions against labeled Trump enemies. Former FBI Director James Comey, California Democratic Senator Adam Schiff, and New York Attorney General Letitia James. In that same post, Trump amplified sentiments from MAGA world that all three are, quote, guilty as hell. Hate opponents, order an attorney general to expedite prosecutions of perceived opponents. What does that get you? I suppose we, as a nation, are about to find out. One thing is certain. Even the most inexperienced defense attorney, should it ever come to it, will be well armed with material to argue against a guilty verdict at trial based on the direct quotes of President Trump. I know that, and I never darkened a single law school room door. We will tonight also explore threats to free speech. And as we finish taping an interview earlier today with the head of FIRE, a nationally recognized free speech advocacy group, word came that ABC is returning Jimmy Kimmel to his show tomorrow night. Now, we know not of what mix of market forces, celebrity denunciation, subscriber cancellations, or possibly even First Amendment considerations came to bear on this corporate decision. But the show is going back on, and that might augur a stiffening of the American cultural spine. TBD on that. It is with Jimmy Kimmel's return that we start tonight. Media reporter for The Washington Post, Scott Nover, joins me now. Scott, I'm grateful for your time and your expertise. Break it all down for us.
I really appreciate it. So just within the last hour, Disney, the parent company of ABC, announced that Jimmy Kimmel is returning to the airwaves on his eponymous Jimmy Kimmel Live show tomorrow night after a week in which he was sidelined following comments regarding the killing of Charlie Kirk.
And what did ABC say by means of explanation or reaction to the rather vociferous blowback that original decision to indefinitely suspend the show generated?
Disney have not said much. They didn't say anything beyond that they were taking Kimmel off the air originally. And then today they just announced that they had taken Kimmel off the air because they didn't want to further inflame an already testy situation and had productive conversations with Kimmel about his remarks going forward and determined that he was able to come back to the air. So we have not heard from Mr. Kimmel, and we have not heard from the affiliate station owners that had expressed their disgust with his comments. And so there's still a lot to learn about the situation.
Walk my audience through that affiliate part of the conversation because we can't take our eyes off that.
So Disney was under pressure not just from conservative critics, but from the companies that own their local stations. So ABC doesn't own, just like CBS doesn't own most of its local stations. They're owned by companies like Tegna and Sinclair, both of whom expressed that they were going to take Kimmel off. They were not going to show Kimmel's program to their local audiences, and so that really forced Disney's hand. On Wednesday of last week.
And so one of the things we're going to keep an eye on, I guess, Scott, is how many of those affiliates reverse course or stick with not airing Jimmy Kimmel once it's available starting again tomorrow night.
Interesting conversation. Tegna, which is the country's largest owner of stations and ABC stations, has direct business before the FCC. And the FCC chairman, Mr. Brendan Carr, has been the biggest critic of Kimmel and his comments. And many press freedom critics have said that he spurred ABC to act in the first place and spurred Tegna to act, or Nexstar to act. So it'll be interesting to see whether the local stations actually run Kimmel as well.
And Nexstar really is the key to this, is it not, Scott?
Nexstar is trying to buy a rival called Tegna for $6 billion, and they need Brendan Carr and the FCC to approve that merger and raise something called the national ownership cap, which prevents them from getting much bigger. So this has largely been seen as a move to appease Brendan Carr, who controls the FCC. And that's really where you're getting these complaints of censorship and First Amendment implications that you alluded to in your open.
Scott Nover, The Washington Post. I appreciate your time. Thanks so much, sir. As we mentioned at the top of the show, President Trump is pressuring Attorney General Pam Bondi quite publicly to go after his political opponents with prosecutions. He wrote in part on social media, this was quoting someone else in the MAGA sphere, "Nothing is being done about what Comey, Adams, Shifty Schiff, and Letitia. They're all guilty as hell, but nothing is going to be done." Again, that's the president quoting others in his circle. The president also installed, and this is important, a new interim U.S. attorney today in Virginia. Now, that kind of thing would provoke scant attention in normal times. But we know these are not that. CBS News Justice correspondent Scott McFarland is here to shine a light on this thing that under normal circumstances would not be on this show or any show. Oh, there's an Eastern District U.S. attorney in Virginia. So what?
So the change here, according to critics of the administration, is because the prior top prosecutor in the Eastern District of Virginia wouldn't bring a case against the Attorney General of New York, Tish James, for mortgage fraud accusations in Norfolk, Virginia, that Tish James unequivocally denies. The prior U.S. attorney, Eric Siebert, was a Trump appointee, brought in just a few months ago at the start of the administration. And the replacement, the successor who was sworn in midday today, is Lindsay Halligan, who is a Trump aide, former Trump lawyer. She represented him in the classified records case that was dropped in 2024 in Florida. And there is concern that if you have a loyalist in a prosecutor's position, a loyalist may do the work of the administration in addition to the work of the Justice Department.
What else can we say about the president's seeming order to Pam Bondi and how it might influence not just what happens in the Eastern District of Virginia, but nationwide?
There's an appearance issue, whether that's an order, a recommendation, or a suggestion from the president. It shatters the norm of independence between the Department of Justice and an administration, one that's been there since the Nixon era. You have an independent justice system that pursues cases on their merits, not because of political recommendations from the administration. That image is gone if you have social media posts that direct the Attorney General to prosecute 3 people by name. That has a fundamental issue inside the Department of Justice. It may cause some turnover. Some people may leave versus stay and work in that environment, but also can have a real practical impact on the cases. That's a defense lawyer's dream, to show that social media post to a jury and say, this is why the case was brought, not because my client committed a crime.
Anyone scrolling their phones this weekend saw mention of Tom Homan, an FBI sting operation, and $50,000.
What's important, I think, from the White House press secretary today was a declarative denial that Tom Homan took $50,000, that he took the money.
Denied it.
But also, the administration has pushed back pretty fiercely since the first reports on Saturday, saying that there was a case that may have been initiated by the Biden administration's Department of Justice, but that did not merit a prosecution. They've alleged it's part of the political weaponization they've alleged was part of the Biden administration's oversight of the Department of Justice.
One of the administration arguments in defense of Tom Homan is he wasn't in any governmental position at the time of this, so was in no position to award contracts or anything other than that.
It's a separate issue because he was a citizen in September 2024, not a federal official, not somebody who worked for an administration. I think the Trump administration has said here in multiple times that they think this was not a righteous investigation that was politically motivated.
Scott McFarland, as always, thank you for breaking it down. Still to come, President Trump makes a big autism announcement. He links the disorder to Tylenol, but some are asking, where is the evidence? We have debated free speech in America since, well, the very beginning. That is not new. Here is what is new. Fury on the right about being canceled, now reversed as power has shifted. First Amendment rights and who stands up for them. We're going to explore that. Also, former Democratic Congressman Colin Allred, a year after an election loss to Senator Ted Cruz on the Republican side, can Allred reverse a cascade of recent statewide Democratic defeats? He joins me later this hour to explore that very question. The Takeout returns in 90 seconds. Welcome back to the Takeout. President Trump just announced the administration believes Tylenol use during pregnancy might contribute to autism. Let's listen.
Taking Tylenol is not good. All right, I'll say it. It's not good. For this reason, they are strongly recommending that women limit Tylenol use during pregnancy unless medically necessary.
That's the president. When the president speaks, it's important that another side be offered as a counterpoint. So I want to read, and the control room, please bring this up, a statement from the maker of Tylenol, Kenvue. Quote, sound science clearly shows that taking acetaminophen does not cause autism. We strongly disagree with any suggestion otherwise and are deeply concerned with the health risks this poses for expecting mothers, unquote. Olivia Rinaldi joins us from the North Lawn of the White House. Olivia, always a pleasure to see you. This is a pretty big announcement from the president and his arrayed medical experts. Did they point to studies or evidence to back them up?
Well, Major, this announcement is ongoing at the moment. We heard from President Trump first and then Secretary Kennedy, the leader of HHS. They're talking about this major decision that they're making. We had not heard about studies. We had asked the White House what the underlying data would be to make such an announcement as this today. As this event is ongoing, I'm not sure if they have brought up any scientific data underlying this. There have been studies about this previously that have shown increased use of acetaminophen could potentially lead to some neurological disorders, but it's not so cut and dry, this data, and I'll certainly leave that to the doctors to talk about. But it's certainly something that is not so easily presented. It's different for every patient. And the longstanding guidance has been to not take acetaminophen very often if you're a pregnant woman, but only in cases where you need to. Now this administration is saying that it's recommended limiting use unless absolutely necessary. You heard the president there saying that taking Tylenol is not good at all. He said ideally you won't take it at all, but you should talk to your doctors unless it's absolutely medically necessary. The president also seemed to broaden this out a little bit, suggesting that there is more autism in California and that Amish people don't have autism at all, in trying to make this point that women should not be taking Tylenol at all when it comes to their pregnancies. So a big announcement here today at the White House. As we mentioned, this event is ongoing in case there's any more news that comes out about this as we've been talking.
If there is more news, I know you'll bring it to us. Olivia Rinaldi, North Lawn of the White House, thank you very much. President of the American College of Obstetricians, Dr. Stephen Fleischman is here with me now. Doctor, your evaluation of what you heard the president say?
I'm a little surprised that that's the extent of the announcement, is to not take the medication unless you medically need to. I would say that's probably what we've been telling people all along. No one takes Tylenol unless it's necessary. It's not like a vitamin, and we would never treat it that way. Patients are told to use acetaminophen when they have a fever, when they have a headache, or other pain symptoms in pregnancy which require treatment. So I was hoping maybe we'd hear something a little bit more detailed, and maybe that's still to come, but I'm not surprised by that statement.
When the president says, as he did, that acetaminophen use is associated with a, quote, very increased risk of autism, would you agree or disagree with that?
I would disagree with that statement. We've been studying acetaminophen and the links to autism for over 20 years. There are numerous studies on this subject. And it is a hard thing to go from a causality, from an association to causation, right? And so I think the problem that we've had all along is that it's really hard to study something like this. Spectrum disorders like autism have a wide array of underlying causes, and we don't know all of them. We do know that there's a genetic component to it. There are probably environmental components to it. When you look at one of the largest studies done that was published last year from Sweden, which to me is a great trial, which looked at siblings who have similar genetic makeup. And so moms who took Tylenol during their pregnancy and those that didn't take it in a subsequent pregnancy in a sibling. And they showed no increased risk of autism in the offspring between the two groups. So I think that kind of study is what we're looking at as sort of gold standard science. Many of the studies that are being included in this, what we call meta-analysis, that I think they're basing much of this recommendation on. There are some studies in there that are well designed and others that are not so well designed. And again, it's hard to study pregnant women and a medication like this because the impact might be for many years to come. And the biggest confounding variable that comes into this is you don't take Tylenol just for fun. Everyone who's pregnant who's taking Tylenol or acetaminophen is taking it because they have a fever, they have pain. And so what you can't associate, is it the fever that is leading to an increased risk of autism, or is it the acetaminophen that you take for the fever? And I think that's where causation is really important. And making a statement, that we've just heard, I'm not sure really helps clarify the picture.
Doctor, as you well know, one of the ways that this translates or is translated to patients alters behavior, alters perspectives, alters what people ask or wonder, well, what should I do in this particular circumstance? The president said, ideally, you don't take it at all, but you could if you, quote, can't tough it out. How do you think that's going to translate to a pregnant woman?
I think they have to really think about that statement of toughing it out. We know that fevers in early pregnancy are associated with cardiac issues, cleft lip, cleft palate, and cranial CNS abnormalities. So the idea that we're going to let someone with a fever tough it out may have much worse implications for a pregnant woman than taking a dose of acetaminophen to bring that fever down. I think that that's not really an appropriate way to handle medical issues in pregnancy.
And generally speaking, how is it defined that a pregnant woman has a fever? Is there a number?
So we generally use a fever of above 100.4. We know that higher fevers are definitely associated with more issues, but if your temperature is above 100.4, taking acetaminophen to bring that down is definitely advised.
And what's the dosage advised in that particular circumstance, Dr. Fleischman?
I think, a single extra strength dose, which is 500 milligrams, should be more than adequate and needed. If it's needed to be repeated, we do that again, but that should be fine.
Would you say that today's announcement falls in the category of more harm than good?
I do. I don't think that there's any new information. I was hoping that maybe there was some study we hadn't heard about that was getting released, but we don't hear about any new studies coming out. So based on the data that's available right now, I think that recommendation doesn't stand. And I do think that the harm of patients not taking acetaminophen is probably a concern. And more importantly, for patients who already have young children who now know that they took acetaminophen when they were pregnant maybe a year or two ago. We've increased a level of anxiety with what I would say is very poor data and really nothing that suggests that there's a clear causality between the two.
Dr. Stephen Fleischman, I appreciate your time and your expertise, sir. Thank you.
Thank you.
Still to come, President Trump creates a $100,000 fee for foreign tech workers to live and work in the United States. The big change to H-1B visas that is causing a fair amount of chaos and confusion. I'll get it out, confusion. You're watching The Takeout. Welcome back. Here's a look at what else we and now you are watching this evening. New details on the TikTok deal. Administration officials say the app's operation in the U.S. will become a, quote, joint venture with a majority of American investors and owners and a majority of Americans on its board of directors. President Trump is expected to sign an executive order later this week declaring that the deal's terms address national security concerns and therefore comply with the law. And Israeli strikes killed dozens of people today during an offensive in Gaza City. These attacks come just one day before President Trump will address the United Nations General Assembly. A growing number of countries are using the summit as an opportunity to recognize Palestinian statehood as part of a so-called two-state solution. The United States will not be one of them. President Trump's H-1B visa crackdown led to a host of questions this week, and on Friday, the president imposed a $100,000 fee on the skilled worker visa. Within hours of the announcement, some top employers sent out memos urging foreign staff to stay in the United States or get back on American soil before Sunday's deadline while they sort out what it all means. The confusion forced the White House to clarify that this new fee will not apply to existing H-1B visa holders and will only be levied once. Those are some pretty important clarifications. For more, I want to bring in CBS News national security contributor Sam Vinograd. Sam, always great to have you here. What led to this, or who pushed this within the administration, and what are some of its earliest ramifications?
Well, certainly we are told that the president was enamored with the idea of revenue generation from this visa category. The H-1B visa program typically allows in about 85,000 new visa holders on an annual basis, and that convinced the president that there was money to be made there. We also understand that there was some pressure internally within the administration to just hire more Americans and to get more U.S. job creation underway. So those two factors, revenue generation and U.S. job creation, likely led to this new proclamation.
And Control Room, let's bring up the graphic we have on the top 5 H-1B visa countries. India, 72.6%, China, 12.5%, Canada, 1%, South Korea, 0.9%, Philippines, 0.8%. What, if anything, do you take from that, Sam?
Well, I take it that the United States is now becoming a more unpredictable place to do business. The president has been systematically going through lawful pathways to come to the United States to work, to live, and reforming them. And so as employers, I think there are serious questions to ask about whether investing in the United States, seeking to employ a lot of people in the United States, is actually going to be predictable and good for your business longer term. And as potential employees consider job offers in the U.S. or in other countries, there are questions about whether coming to the U.S. is a safe bet anymore or whether they should go work elsewhere.
You often think about the geopolitical implications of things. What about this?
Well, India certainly is not going to be pleased. As the largest shareholder, if you will, of H-1B visas, this is going to hit Indian nationals hard. This comes at a time when Trump and Modi have had a bit of a roller coaster relationship. Indeed, the Prime Minister of India and President Trump have had a bromance at certain times and then have really gone at it when it comes to trade relations and other matters. They had a bit of a thaw in the last week or so, but this could throw a wrench in the warming of relations.
And you know, and I know, and much of the world witnessed Narendra Modi in China standing next to Xi Jinping and Russian President Vladimir Putin.
Certainly, and I expect at the UN General Assembly this week, behind closed doors, President Xi of China will continue to try to position China as a reliable partner, as a reliable global leader, and China as a reliable place to invest and do business, and try to paint a stark contrast with the business environment in the U.S. right now.
Sam Vinograd, you grabbed your Reese's. That's a good call.
Always.
The candy doesn't eat itself. I would say that all the time. Thanks so much, Sam. Former Texas Congressman Colin Allred's race to oust Senator Ted Cruz, a Republican, was the most expensive Senate race in 2024. Not deterred, the Democrat is running again, this time to win the seat currently held by Republican Senator John Cornyn. Allred joins me next, right here on The Takeout. Welcome back to The Takeout. Thank you for staying with us. Colin Allred thinks he can turn Texas' seat there in the Senate blue for the first time since 1988. Boy, it's been a long time. Last fall, the NFL linebacker turned Democratic congressman lost his bid to unseat Republican Senator Ted Cruz. This time around, he's running for the seat that John Cornyn, Republican, currently holds. And today, he released an affordability plan, which he wants to be part of that conversation for the nomination and for the general election. Texas Democratic Senate candidate and former Congressman Colin Allred joins me now. It's good to see you. Let's just talk very briefly about your affordability plan and what is new or potentially interesting or politically cutting edge about it.
Well, listen, I just wanted to make sure that we talk about what I think is most important, in this election cycle, but also just facing our country right now, which is that working people are working harder and harder for less, and they're swimming upstream. They feel like they can't make it. And Major, I've been working in restaurants around Texas. I've been working on construction sites. I've been going to high school football games where I talk to folks in the crowd, and I ask people while I'm sitting there, what's the biggest concern for you? What's costing you the most? And we put the answers to that into this plan, which is concerns with the cost of groceries, the cost of the light bill, of healthcare, of childcare in particular, which was a huge one for seniors. So many costs that are adding up, including taking care of their seniors and their family. And so I wanted to make sure that because I grew up this way, paycheck to paycheck, being raised by a single mom who was a public school teacher, that we put this at the heart of our campaign, but I also think it should be the heart of really this entire election cycle.
So you have an opponent, the Democratic nomination, James Tallarico, member of the state House. He was on this program. He complimented you, said if you win the nomination, he'll campaign vigorously for you. But he said he had values and a generational approach to this that was different and better than yours. What do you have to say about James Tallarico, and why should Texas Democrats choose you over him?
Well, listen, I'm welcome anybody into the race. I think you know me. I'm a competitor. When you play in the NFL, you're used to competition. I think competition, makes me better. But I know who I am. I know why I'm running. I know what I bring to the table. And Major, you remember back in 2018, I had never run for office before, and I flipped a Republican-held seat here in Texas that had been gerrymandered for a Republican, multi-million-dollar race. I represented a true swing district. And I kept winning in that swing district. And I've shown that I know how to bring together a coalition of Democrats, yes, of course, but also of independents and Republicans, and particularly focusing on turning out working people and including Black and Latino Texans, who I think are too often getting written off in some of these discussions. I overperformed in the last election in the Rio Grande Valley by over 8 points, flipping some Republican counties here in Texas. We showed that we can run ahead of a ticket. I want to now lead a ticket and make sure that we can win here.
Explain to my audience, Colin, from your perspective, what the dynamics of this race are different from 2024. Why the Paxton-Cornyn primary on the Republican side makes it different, and why the absence of Donald Trump on the ballot makes it different.
It's such an important point. This is a completely different election. And, I think in many ways, just like in 2018, when that election was a reaction to so many things that were happening around the country that folks felt like they had not voted for, I think that's what we're going to see here as well. And I think a lot of folks were promised, particularly working people in the last election, they were promised that their costs were going to go down, that inflation was going to go away on day one, that everything was going to be great. They're going to go back to an economy where they felt like they could get ahead. And they've gotten the opposite. And what we have to do, I think, in this election is remind folks of that, drill down on that, talk about how their light bill is going to be more expensive because of what they did in the big, beautiful bill, that they're going to lose their health care, they're going to lose funding for their kids' schools, and that that working folks are getting screwed by this administration, by what's going on in Washington. And so it's, in a lot of ways, this is a completely different election. But when it comes to John Cornyn and Ken Paxton, to me, they're both either too corrupt or too weak to represent our state. If you were here, Major, you'd be seeing that these folks are running just to get one person in the country to pay attention to them when they should be trying to represent 30 million Texans. It's kind of disgusting. I've had enough of it.
Colin, you have to be a realist. The trend lines are one way and one way only since 1988, the last time a Democrat won a Senate seat. The races continue to draw tremendous amounts of money. Democratic donors continue to believe in what the results suggest is little more than a pipe dream. Why is your race not just another version of the same pipe dream?
Yeah. Well, our races are expensive because we have 30 million people. But listen, sitting here right now, the Republicans know that I am leading their leading candidate, which is Ken Paxton. They know that they are in trouble, and they should recognize that. And they're spending a lot of money trying to rescue John Cornyn in a bid that who knows what the result of that will be. but they certainly recognize the danger that they're in. And so I hope that folks out there can understand what's actually happening here, which is that we have had a trend line that was getting better and better here in Texas, where we're having closer and closer elections. And the last election, in many ways, was a big setback. But I've been talking about some of the things that I thought we needed to fix. That I do think we're partly responsible for that. We had a lot of frustration around what was happening, at the border. My family's from Brownsville, Texas, the very tip of the border with Mexico, where my grandfather was a customs officer. I was talking about how we have to address this. I grew up counting, paychecks, and my mom and us swiping her debit card, being barely able to afford our groceries. I knew what inflation was doing to working people. I don't have to read about some of these things. I live them. And so I want to make sure that we take that experience and go all around our state, talk about how we don't have to keep going in this direction, and keep that hope that we don't have to have representation that doesn't care about us. We can have a senator who will represent all 30 million of us.
Colin Allred, I appreciate the time, sir. Thank you.
Thank you, Major.
The reaction to the murder of Charlie Kirk and the crackdown on his critics is raising concerns, pronounced concerns, over the state of free speech in America. I speak to a First Amendment expert next, right here on The Takeout. Welcome back to The Takeout. Efforts to crack down on those who criticize Charlie Kirk in any way, shape, or form, including Jimmy Kimmel, have raised alarms over the state of free speech in the United States. But it's a broader conversation than just that. Earlier, I spoke to the president and CEO of the Foundation for Individual Rights and Expression. That's called FIRE. His name is Greg Lukianoff. We spoke, importantly, just before Disney announced the Jimmy Kimmel Show will return tomorrow. Give me a free speech index for the United States today.
Okay. Now, first of all, the murder of Charlie Kirk was, of course, a savage blow for freedom of speech. It was a terrible thing, and it was definitely intimidating to those of us who speak on campuses all the time. But what the administration has done since that is to take advantage of the tragedy to go after political enemies. And I would say that the last week coming out of the administration, they've sort of rediscovered more or less every weapon that the left would use on campus to go after speech, and are now trying to use it, things like hate speech, for example. Pam Bondi discovered...
The Attorney General.
Yes.
Said hate speech is prosecutable.
Yes, hate speech is prosecutable. She tried to...
False.
Absolutely false. Yeah, the First Amendment, there is no exception for hate speech under the First Amendment, nor should there be. We have something called the bedrock principle in First Amendment law, which is essentially the idea that you can't ban something just because it's offensive. That's too subjective, that is too broad. And that's
too subject to government abuse.
Too subject to government abuse, exactly. But as she tried to walk it back, and by the way, she walked it back very badly, she still said things that were protected speech. Donald Trump leaned into this idea that hate speech is unprotected, even mentioning this to a reporter, that you could potentially be prosecuted under hate speech. So we've seen all of these mechanisms that people, including Charlie Kirk, actually criticized, that the government should not be the arbiter of what is true. So criticism of misinformation, for example. But the argument that they're leaning into with Jimmy Kimmel is that essentially he said something untrue about the shooter in that case.
What does the Jimmy Kimmel action from the FCC, its suggestion, and then ABC's action tell you about where we are?
Well, it goes back further than that. So since the very beginning of the Trump administration, he's gone after basically things that he perceives to be, and I think correctly, several centers of liberal power. So essentially he's been going after law firms, which do a lot of pro bono for the left. And that's actually, I feel like, the least appreciated thing that's happening. Telling lawyers that they're going to get in trouble for opposing the government is scary. And saying that they can't go into federal buildings, which of course include courts.
Or they lose their security clearance.
Just crazy. Then, of course, there's the going after higher education. And I'm front of the line being critical of a lot of things going on in higher education, particularly regarding free speech and academic freedom. But the Trump administration's behavior to Harvard, for example, was essentially demanding federalizing the Harvard itself. So that was, they're really exceeding the powers that they have. But when it comes to the media, that's probably been the most concentrated attack. And the Trump administration has shown willingness to dangle mergers over companies' head. You might know a little
I'm
bit
aware of that.
You might know just a little bit about that.
I think I read something, a blog or two about that.
May feel pretty abstract, I'm sure. So they've been willing to dangle mergers over people's heads,
Yep.
and they made it very clear that they're going to be they're willing to file lawsuits against media companies. They filed a lawsuit against the Wall Street Journal for saying that maybe Donald Trump sent a lewd birthday, drawing to Jeffrey Epstein.
Yes.
And of course, that ended up being true. They verified the signature and everything, but a lawsuit nonetheless. And so by the time you actually get to the point that you have Brendan Carr, who has been
FCC chair,
who's been a disaster for free speech since he's taken over, saying that he would potentially seek out punishment for Jimmy Kimmel for what he said. The threats were already well established, but it was only hours after Brendan Carr said this on the Benny Johnson show, when clearly he'd already been saying this to all sorts of people, that they dumped Jimmy Kimmel pretty much permanently.
So is the right falling prey to the same temptations that you would argue the left fell prey to during COVID or George Floyd?
I would say that they're
going even farther.
They're playing from the same playbook. And that essentially, I know that to at least to a degree, there are people on the right who have always been saying that we need to use these tactics that the left has used on campuses against the left. So I know that there are some people who are thinking of this as a cynical strategy. But we've always, at FIRE, at my organization, always said that, no, you don't legitimize these weapons against freedom of speech. It doesn't work out that people just decide, oh, I guess we'll abandon them now. It just turns out to whoever has power at the time gets to use this weapon against their enemies. And pretty soon, you're not a free country.
You can watch my entire conversation with Greg Lukianoff on YouTube, or you can listen to it on your favorite podcast platform. That's what we do here. President Trump and Elon Musk reunite months after their pretty messy feud, the meeting at Charlie Kirk's memorial. We don't know exactly what they had to say to each other, but we're going to try to scratch around that a bit with our reporter panel. That's next, right here on The Takeout. Welcome back to The Takeout. Prominent Republicans and very high-profile members of the Trump administration attended Charlie Kirk's memorial service yesterday. One of the most interesting people to attend caught the camera's attention, Elon Musk. He was seen chatting and shaking hands with President Trump up in the suite. Cordial reunion, or looked like a cordial reunion, comes after, as I'm sure you remember, pretty public feud between the two. That is to say, Musk and President Trump. What's interesting is both Musk and the White House posted pictures of them sitting together with the caption, "For Charlie." Now, Washington has a terrible habit of taking things that are important and trivializing them by resorting entirely to a political calculus. We will never do that with Charlie Kirk's assassination. It was a shattering moment for the country and should be regarded as such. However, there are things that have come from it in the political space. To get to that, I want to bring in our reporter panel. Eleanor Mueller covers Congress for Semaphore. Daniela Diaz does the same for Notice. Remember, Notice stands for News of the U.S.
I love that you do that every time. It makes me so happy.
So I opened this show, the two of you, by saying that of the politicians that I've covered, and there have been one or two, few dislike being quoted back to themselves more than Donald Trump, the president of the United States. So I remember him saying, or posting or something not too long ago, don't meet with the Democrats. There's no point in doing that, or words to that effect. And yet we get word late this afternoon, he's in fact going to sit down with Hakeem Jeffries, House Minority Leader, and Charles Schumer, Senate Democratic Leader, sometime this week to talk about a shutdown scenario.
That's exactly right. It comes after a letter that was released over the weekend from Schumer and Jeffries, basically calling for a meeting with Trump, saying we have to talk about the government funding deadline. We don't want to shut down, but it's imperative that we try to figure this out ahead of time. And of course, in the end, even though Speaker Mike Johnson and Senate Majority Leader John Thune are the leaders in the Senate, it's really Trump that calls all the shots. So this is going to be an incredibly important meeting, and possibly the first one ever between Trump, Jeffries, and Schumer. Now, Do we have a date yet? No. Do we have a time yet? No. We know that
just this week.
Just this week is all we've been told, but even that much is quite a bit right now.
And Eleanor, for a reversal like this, that might suggest that there is some calculations that the White House has done on the back of an envelope, like they've got to look like they're at least making an effort.
Absolutely. They're in a tough spot right now. House Republicans have said that the only thing that they're open to is this simple extension of current funding levels, adding on money for member security, White House security, judicial branch security. Democrats have said pretty straight up since the beginning that that is not something that they're open to. They want fixes to health care, both to these Obamacare credits that are set to expire
and maybe
the
to Medicaid if they can push it that far.
Exactly. And so not a lot of time left.
This is what brings us back to the images that both Elon Musk and the White House portrayed, because there is a conversation, and I think it's a legitimate one, that this shattering national tragedy, which is what Charlie Kirk's assassination was, may in fact be a moment of renewed Republican unity, which is important in a shutdown set of political calculus. If the Republicans are really aligned, and they're aligned with the Trump White House, and they feel a sort of renewed spirit in that sense, that could create a different dynamic than would have existed 2 weeks ago. Would you agree with that? I
would agree with that. What we saw at the funeral was really a unified front from the Republican Party. I mean, there were just so many different members there speaking to who Charlie Kirk was as a person. Also, really important to note, Charlie Kirk was actually one of the people trying to mediate the relationship between Elon Musk and President Trump after that relationship deteriorated. That is why you saw them both tweet for Charlie and those photos that are on the screen right now of them together, because he was hoping he liked Elon Musk, he liked Donald Trump, and he was the one trying to really repair those relations. It does really seem that going into this week, Republicans are on the same page. We know that that can change really quickly, depending on whatever the House Freedom Caucus wants, whatever Johnson is hearing from his conference. But this is really going to be between Democrats and Trump when it comes to government spending.
Eleanor, speaking of things that can change quickly, it was indefinitely when ABC pulled Jimmy Kimmel off the air. Indefinitely is less than a week.
It sure is. And we don't have a lot of information.
No, we don't.
The statement that ABC put out basically just said he'll be back. They've agreed on what he's going to say. We don't know yet what that is. And I think this is a great example of how there are some areas on post-Charlie Kirk's death where Republicans don't 100% agree. We saw some Republicans like Cynthia Lummis say, Well, exactly. Ted Cruz say that I think that the FCC chair, by intimidating, Jimmy Kimmel's bosses, or appearing to intimidating, may have been acting like a mafia boss. And so other Republicans have told us in the last week that they very much support what the FCC chair did. And so there's some real daylight there.
And Danielle, as it came down from both the senators that you name-checked, Eleanor, it wasn't so much that it was a terrible idea that just it could be used by Democrats if they get back into power, so we don't want to be on the other side of that.
I mean, that's what a lot of the argument is from Republicans if they disagree with something Trump does. And then Democrats use that argument too. This could backfire. We've seen this with redistricting. We've seen this with the rescissions fight or government funding fights. They are consistently like, if we're going to do this, I mean, we might be able to get this should we lose the majority. So they're not wrong with that argument.
Right.
Very quickly, Eleanor, outside of the Capitol, both the governor's races in Virginia and New Jersey are going to be barometers of where things, and we're not going to have a resolution until November, but they're both on everyone's mind.
Absolutely. I think a lot of the restructuring we're seeing of the Democratic Party, the Republican Party, is going to be playing out at the state level. Washington politics in a lot of ways feels like they're pretty stuck. And so I think the parties are watching carefully, not just those gubernatorial races, but also the House races in very specific districts in states like Michigan, to get a sense of what voters want to see as they try and helm the Democratic Party back toward retaking control of Washington.
Eleanor Mueller, Daniela Diaz. Remember that candy does not eat itself. Reach in there. Happy Monday, everyone. I'm glad to be back. This is The Takeout. Relentlessly curious, reliably civil, occasionally clever.